At the 2024 Monaco Grand Prix, something magical happened that stopped the racing world in its tracks. Lewis Hamilton, seven-time world champion, spotted his father Anthony in the grandstand during the formation lap. What seemed like a simple father-son moment became something so beautiful that millions of people around the world couldn't stop talking about it. But this wasn't just any ordinary gesture between a famous driver and his proud dad. This was the completion of a dream that started 62 years ago in the Caribbean. A dream that traveled across oceans, through 3 generations, and connected a grandfather who never got his chance, a father who gave everything, and a son who finally understood what winning really means. What Lewis did next wasn't planned. It wasn't for the cameras. It wasn't for publicity. It was pure love in action. The kind of moment that reminds us why family matters more than fame, why sacrifice creates champions, and why some gestures are worth more than all the trophies in the world. This is the story behind that moment. The story of a secret gesture that connected 3 generations of Hamilton men. The story of dreams that refuse to die, love that conquers time, and a father and son who found their way back to each other just when it mattered most. Get ready to discover why millions of hearts melted that day in Monaco, and why this moment became more than just a racing story. It became a reminder that the greatest victories happen not on the track but in the stands, where love lives forever. The roar of engines filled the air at Monaco. Thousands of people crowded the grandstands. Flags waved from every country. The smell of fuel and rubber hung heavy in the warm May air. Lewis Hamilton sat in his silver Mercedes race car. His heart beat fast inside his chest. This was the Monaco Grand Prix, the most famous race in the world. Every driver dreamed of winning here. The other cars lined up next to him on the starting grid. Red cars from Ferrari, blue cars from Alpine, orange cars from McLaren. All 20 drivers were ready to race around the narrow streets of Monte Carlo. Lewis looked through his helmet visor at the crowd. So many faces stared back at him. Cameras flashed everywhere. People held signs with his name on them. Some wore his yellow helmet colors. Then he saw something that made his breath catch. There, in the grandstand at Turn 1, sat an older black man. He wore a faded red Bezo cap and held a small British flag in his weathered hands. The man had a walking stick leaning against his knee. His face looked tired but proud. It was Anthony Hamilton, Lewis's father. Lewis felt his chest tighten. Dad looked so much older than the last time they had been together. When had those lines appeared around his eyes? When had his shoulders started to slump like that? The formation lap was about to begin. Lewis gripped his steering wheel tighter. All around him, engines revved louder and louder. The other drivers were getting ready to start their warm-up lap around the track, but Lewis couldn't look away from his father. Anthony sat very still in his seat. People moved around him, but he stayed focused on his son's car. Even from far away, Lewis could see his father's eyes searching for him through the crowd of cars. Then their eyes met. For just a moment, everything else disappeared. The noise of the engines faded. The crowd became quiet in Lewis's mind. There was only a father and his son, looking at each other across the racetrack. Lewis felt a warm feeling spread through his chest. It was the same feeling he had when he was 8 years old, racing go-karts while his dad cheered from the fence. Back when everything was simple. Back when winning meant making his father proud. Slowly, Lewis lifted his right hand from the steering wheel. He placed it over his heart and tapped twice. Then he pointed up toward the sky. It was a small gesture. Most people wouldn't even notice it. But Anthony saw it right away. In the grandstand, the older man's eyes filled with tears. He put down his little British flag and made the same sign back to his son. Tap, tap on his chest. Then he pointed up to the blue sky above Monaco. The cameras caught it all. Millions of people around the world were watching on television. They saw Lewis make his mysterious gesture. They saw his father respond from the stands. Something special was happening, but nobody knew what it meant. Formation lap. Lewis. His engineer's voice crackled through the radio. Time to go. Lewis nodded inside his helmet, but his eyes stayed on his father for one more second. Anthony was smiling now, even though tears ran down his cheeks. He mouthed 3 words that Lewis couldn't hear but understood perfectly. I love you. The cars began to move. Lewis shifted into first gear and started rolling forward with the other 19 drivers. They would drive one slow lap around the Monaco circuit, before lining up again for the actual race start. As his car pulled away from the starting grid, Lewis spoke quietly into his radio. His voice was thick with emotion. "Dad's here," he whispered to his engineer. "This one's for him." "Copy that, Lewis," came the reply. "We'll make it count." The Mercedes rolled through the streets of Monaco, past the famous casino, past the harbor full of fancy boats, past the swimming pool section where so many races had been won and lost. But Lewis wasn't thinking about the track. He was thinking about his father sitting in those stands, about how hard it must have been for him to travel here, about how much that simple gesture meant to both of them. The formation lap continued. Other drivers tested their brakes and warmed up their tires. They checked their car's balance and prepared for the most important 30 seconds of their week. The race started. Lewis did all of those things too. But part of his mind stayed with his father, with that moment when they had looked at each other and shared their secret sign. As the cars completed their warm-up lap and returned to the starting grid, Lewis glanced up at the grandstand one more time. Anthony was still there, still watching, still believing in his son after all these years. The race was about to begin. 20 of the best drivers in the world were ready to battle for victory on the most difficult track in Formula One. Anything could happen in the next hour and a half. But for Lewis Hamilton, the most important moment had already occurred. He had seen his father in the stands. He had made their special gesture, and somehow he knew this race would be different from all the others. The red lights began to appear above the starting line. One light, then two, then three. In a few seconds, all 5 lights would show, then disappear. That would be the signal for 20 race cars to sprint toward the first corner at nearly 200 miles per hour. Lewis took a deep breath. His hands were steady on the steering wheel now. His heart beat with calm purpose instead of nervous energy. "For you, Dad," he whispered into his helmet. "For everything you gave me. For everything you taught me. This one's for you." The 4th red light appeared. Then the 5th. 20 engines roared to full power. 20 drivers prepared to risk everything for glory. And in the grandstand, one proud father watched his son chase a dream they had built together. One small gesture at a time. The lights went out. The 2024 Monaco Grand Prix had begun. But the real story, the story of what that gesture truly meant, and why it would soon melt the hearts of millions around the world, was only just starting to unfold. 29 years earlier, Stevenage, England, 8-year-old Lewis Hamilton sat in the passenger seat of his father's old car. The blue Vauxhall Cavalier rattled and shook as they drove down the country road. Behind them, a small trailer bounced along, carrying Lewis's go-kart. "Are you nervous, son?" Anthony Hamilton asked, glancing at his boy in the rearview mirror. Lewis nodded. His small hands twisted together in his lap. Today was his first big karting race, at Rye House Kart Circuit. All the other kids would be there. Kids who had been racing longer than him. Kids whose families had more money for better equipment. "What if I'm not fast enough, Dad?" Lewis asked quietly. "What if the other kids laugh at me?" Anthony pulled the car over to the side of the road. He turned around to face his son. Lewis looked so small in his new racing suit. The helmet on the seat next to him seemed too big for his head. "Listen to me, Lewis," Anthony said softly. "Do you know why we're here?" Lewis shook his head. "We're here because you love to race. Remember the first time you sat in a go-kart? You were 6 years old. Your eyes lit up like Christmas morning. You didn't care about winning or losing. You just wanted to feel that speed." Anthony reached into his wallet and pulled out a crumpled 10-pound note. It was the last money they had until his next paycheck. "You see this? This is what I had left after buying your racing tires this week. I worked 3 extra shifts at the railway to pay for them. But you know what? I'd do it again tomorrow. Because when you're happy, I'm happy." Lewis felt tears forming in his eyes. He knew his dad worked so hard for him. Every night, Anthony came home tired and dirty from his job, but he always had time to help Lewis practice or work on the kart. "But what if I let you down?" Lewis whispered. Anthony smiled and got out of the car. He opened Lewis's door and knelt down beside him. "Son, I want to teach you something my father taught me back in Grenada. Something special that only our family knows." Anthony placed his hand over his heart. He tapped it twice. Once, twice. Then he pointed up toward the cloudy English sky. "This means something very important," Anthony said. "The 2 taps on your heart, that's for love. 1 tap for the love I give you. 1 tap for the love you give back to me." And pointing to the sky, that means our dreams are as big as the heavens above us. Lewis watched carefully. His father's face was serious but kind. When you're out there on the track and you feel scared or alone, you make this sign. And you remember, I'm always with you. My love is always with you. No matter what happens. Anthony stood up and helped Lewis out of the car. "Now let's practice it together." Lewis placed his small hand over his heart. Tap, tap. Then he pointed up to the sky, just like his father had shown him. "Perfect," Anthony said, his voice full of pride. "That's our secret, Lewis. Just between you and me. When you make that sign, I'll know you're thinking of me. And when I make it back, you'll know I'm thinking of you." They unloaded the go-kart from the trailer. It wasn't the newest or the fanciest kart at the track. The paint was scratched, and some of the parts were held together with extra bolts. But Anthony had worked on it for hours in their tiny garage, making sure every piece was perfect. Other families arrived in big trucks and fancy cars. Their carts looked like they had just come from the factory. Some of the fathers wore expensive racing jackets and talked loudly about engine tuning and tire pressure. A few of them stared when Anthony and Lewis walked past. Lewis was the only black child at the track. Some of the other kids whispered and pointed. One boy's father shook his head and said something Lewis couldn't hear, but it made Anthony's jaw tighten. "Dad?" Lewis asked quietly. "Why are they looking at us like that?" Anthony knelt down and put his hands on Lewis's shoulders. "Some people haven't learned yet that talent comes in all colors, son. But that's their problem, not ours. You just focus on being the best Lewis Hamilton you can be." The race officials called all the drivers to the starting line. Lewis's hands shook as he put on his helmet. The other kids looked so confident, so ready. As Lewis climbed into his cart, he looked over at his father standing by the fence. Anthony was wearing his old red baseball cap and holding a small British flag he had bought from a gas station. Anthony caught his son's eye and smiled. Then he made their special gesture. Hand over heart, tap tap, point to the sky. Lewis felt something warm spread through his chest. All the fear melted away. His dad was right there, loving him, believing in him. That was all he needed. Lewis put his hand over his heart and made the sign back to his father. Even with his racing gloves on, it felt perfect. The race began. Lewis started in last place because he was the youngest driver. The other carts pulled away from him at the start. For the first few laps, he was far behind everyone else. But slowly, Lewis began to find his rhythm. He remembered everything his father had taught him about taking corners smoothly and keeping his racing line. He passed one cart, then another. By halfway through the race, Lewis was in 5th place, then 4th, then 3rd. The crowd at the small track began to notice the little boy in the scratched-up cart. He was moving through the field like he belonged there, like he had been racing all his life. With 2 laps to go, Lewis caught up to the leader. The other boy was bigger and had been racing for 3 years. But Lewis was fearless. He found a gap on the inside of a corner and took the lead. The checkered flag waved. Lewis Hamilton had won his first real race. As he climbed out of his cart, Lewis looked for his father. Anthony was jumping up and down by the fence, tears streaming down his face. He was shouting Lewis's name and waving that little gas station flag. Lewis ran to his father, still wearing his helmet. Anthony scooped him up in his arms and spun him around. "I did it, Dad?" Lewis laughed. "I really did it." "You sure did, son," Anthony said, his voice thick with emotion. "I am so proud of you. So very proud." As they hugged, Lewis made their gesture one more time. This time it wasn't because he was scared, it was because he was happy. Because he wanted his father to know that this victory belonged to both of them. Anthony made the sign back, and then they both pointed to the sky together. Some of the other parents watched them celebrate. A few smiled and clapped. Others just stared. But Lewis didn't care. He had his father. He had their secret gesture, and he had just discovered something amazing about himself. He was fast. Really fast. That night, as they drove home with the small trophy on the dashboard, Lewis asked his father a question. "Dad, do you think I could be a Formula One driver someday? Like the ones we watch on TV?" Anthony looked at his son in the rearview mirror. Lewis's eyes were bright with possibility. His racing suit was dirty and his hair was messy from the helmet. But he looked happier than Anthony had ever seen him. "Son," Anthony said carefully, "Formula One is very expensive. We don't have that kind of money. The families who make it there, they're different from us." Lewis was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "But what if we worked really hard? What if we saved up? What if we never gave up?" Anthony felt his heart break and soar at the same time. His boy was dreaming big dreams. Impossible dreams. But wasn't that what dreams were supposed to be? "Tell you what," Anthony said, "if you keep racing like you did today, if you keep working hard and never give up, then we'll find a way. Somehow, we'll find a way." Lewis smiled and made their gesture in the back seat. 2 taps over his heart, then pointing to the roof of the car, Anthony made it back, watching him in the mirror. Neither of them knew it then, but that promise would change everything. It would cost Anthony almost everything he owed. It would test their relationship in ways they couldn't imagine. But it would also lead them to places they had never dreamed possible. All because of a boy who loved to race, a father who loved his son, and a simple gesture that meant "I love you" to the moon and back. As they drove through the quiet streets of Stevenage, heading home to their small house, Lewis fell asleep in the back seat. The trophy sat next to him, catching the light from passing street lamps. Anthony drove carefully, thinking about the future, about go-karts and racing schools and Formula One cars that cost millions of pounds, about a dream that seemed impossible but felt so real when he saw the joy on his son's face. He didn't know how they would do it, but he knew they would try, because sometimes love is enough to make impossible dreams come true. 12 years later, the dream that started in a scratched-up go-kart had grown into something bigger than either Anthony or Lewis had imagined. But it had cost them almost everything. Anthony Hamilton sat in the parking lot outside the McLaren Technology Centre in Woking, England. His hands gripped the steering wheel of his 3rd car in 10 years. This one was newer than the old Cavalier, but still nothing fancy. Just reliable enough to get him to his son's races. Inside the gleaming building, Lewis was meeting with Ron Dennis, the boss of McLaren Formula One team. Today would decide if Lewis Hamilton, now 22 years old, would become the first black driver in Formula One history. Anthony's wallet held exactly £43. It was all the money he had left after years of paying for racing schools, formula cars, and travel across Europe. He had sold everything: their house, his car, even his precious collection of reggae records that reminded him of his father back in Grenada. But it had been worth every sacrifice. Lewis had won championships in Formula Renault. He had dominated GP2, the last step before Formula One. Every racing expert in Europe was talking about the young British driver who could do things with a race car that seemed impossible. The building's glass doors opened. Lewis walked out, his face calm but his eyes bright with excitement. Anthony's heart stopped beating for a moment. Lewis got into the passenger seat and looked at his father. Then, without saying a word, he made their gesture. 2 taps over his heart. Point to the sky. Anthony felt tears start to form. "You got it?" "I got it, Dad," Lewis said quietly. "I'm going to drive for McLaren in Formula One. We did it. We actually did it." Anthony made the gesture back to his son, then pulled him into the biggest hug of his life. Both men cried in that parking lot, thinking about all the years of struggle, all the times they had almost given up, all the people who had said it was impossible. "Your grandfather would be so proud," Anthony whispered. A Hamilton boy racing in Formula One. 3 months later, Lewis stood on the starting grid for the 2007 Australian Grand Prix in Melbourne. His silver McLaren looked beautiful under the bright sunshine. This was it, his first Formula One race. In the grandstand, Anthony wore his lucky red cap and held a British flag. It was bigger than the gas station flag from Lewis's first karting race. But it meant just as much to both of them. The race was incredible. Lewis didn't just survive his first Formula One race. He finished 3rd on the podium. As he climbed out of his car, Lewis looked up at the grandstand and found his father in the crowd. Anthony was jumping up and down, crying and laughing at the same time. Lewis made their gesture clearer and more deliberate now, so the television cameras caught it perfectly. Anthony made it back from the stands, and millions of people around the world saw a father and son sharing something special, even if they didn't understand what it meant. The racing world was amazed. Lewis Hamilton wasn't just fast, he was fearless. Race after race, he fought with the sport's biggest stars and often beat them. By mid-season, he was leading the championship, but success brought new challenges neither of them had expected. Suddenly, Lewis was famous. Photographers followed him everywhere. Reporters asked him questions about everything except racing. Sponsors wanted to give him millions of pounds to wear their watches and drive their cars. Lewis moved to a fancy apartment in Monaco. He traveled on private jets. He ate at restaurants that cost more for one meal than Anthony used to make in a week. Anthony stayed in England, working his regular job, watching his son's new life on television like everyone else. The distance between them started small. A missed phone call here, a rushed conversation there. Lewis was so busy with his new life that their long talks about racing became quick text messages. At the Brazilian Grand Prix in 2008, Lewis had a chance to win his first world championship. He needed to finish 5th or better to beat Felipe Massa and become champion. Anthony was there, of course, wearing his red cap in the stands. But this time, he felt different, like a stranger watching his son's life from the outside. The race was dramatic. Rain fell on the track. Cars spun and crashed. With 5 laps to go, Lewis was 6th place, not good enough to win the championship. Anthony's heart broke watching his son's dream slip away. But then, on the last corner of the last lap, Lewis passed Timo Glock and moved into 5th place. He had won the world championship by just 1 point. The crowd went crazy. Lewis screamed with joy over the radio. As he climbed out of his car, he looked for his father in the grandstand. Anthony was there, tears streaming down his face, making their gesture with shaking hands. Lewis made it back, pointing to the sky with both hands now. At 23 years old, he was the youngest Formula One world champion in history. But even in that moment of pure triumph, something felt different. Success had changed Lewis. Money and fame were pulling him toward a world that Anthony didn't understand. After the celebration, Lewis flew back to Monaco with his celebrity friends. Anthony flew home to England alone, carrying the memory of their gesture, but wondering if his son still needed him the same way. The next few years brought more wins, more money, and more distance between them. In 2010, Lewis had a difficult season with McLaren. The car wasn't competitive, and he finished 4th in the championship. Reporters criticized his driving and questioned whether he was losing his edge. Anthony wanted to call his son and offer support, like he had done during those early karting days. But Lewis's phone always went to voicemail. His calendar was full of sponsor events and celebrity parties. At the 2012 Brazilian Grand Prix, Lewis made a shocking announcement. He was leaving McLaren, the team that had given him his chance to join Mercedes, a team that hadn't won a championship in decades. Anthony read about it in the newspapers, like everyone else. Lewis hadn't asked for his advice. He had made the biggest decision of his career, without talking to the man who had sacrificed everything to get him there. That night, Anthony called his son. "Mercedes?" Anthony asked when Lewis finally answered. "Lewis, they haven't won anything in years. McLaren is still competitive. Why would you leave?" "Dad, you don't understand the business side," Lewis replied, his voice tired and distant. "Mercedes is offering me more money and more control. It's the right move. This isn't about money, son. This is about racing. This is about the dream we built together." "Maybe that's the problem," Lewis said quietly. "Maybe I need to stop making decisions based on old dreams and start thinking about my future." The words hit Anthony like a punch to the stomach. Old dreams? Was that what their journey together had become? "I have to go, Dad. I'm at a sponsored dinner." The phone went dead. Anthony sat in his small apartment, looking at old photos of Lewis's karting days. In every picture, they were together. Father and son, working as a team, sharing the same dream. But success had pulled them apart. Lewis was living in a world of millionaires and celebrities, while Anthony remained the working-class man from Stevenage who had given everything for his son's dream. The 2013 season began with Lewis at Mercedes. Anthony watched the first race on television instead of being there in person. It felt strange, seeing his son make their gesture on the starting grid without him there to make it back. Mercedes wasn't competitive that first year. Lewis struggled to 8th in the championship. The media said he had made a mistake leaving McLaren. Some reporters even suggested that Lewis had become too distracted by his celebrity lifestyle to focus on racing. Anthony wanted to be there for his son during this difficult time, but the gap between them felt too wide to cross. Lewis lived in Monaco with pop stars and actors. Anthony still lived in the same small town where their dream had started. At the end of 2013, Anthony made a difficult decision. He stopped going to races. Not because he didn't love his son, but because he felt like he no longer belonged in Lewis's world. Lewis noticed his father's absence but didn't know how to bridge the gap they had created. Success had given him everything he thought he wanted, but it had cost him the most important thing, his relationship with the man who had made it all possible. The gesture that had once connected them across racetracks now felt like a memory from a simpler time. A time when love and dreams were enough. Before money and fame complicated everything. But sometimes the biggest victories come from the hardest defeats. And sometimes you have to lose what matters most to remember what really matters at all. Lewis Hamilton was about to learn that lesson in the most painful way possible. 2014. The year everything changed. Lewis Hamilton stood on the top step of the podium in Abu Dhabi, holding his second World Championship trophy above his head. Fireworks exploded in the desert sky. The crowd cheered louder than thunder. He had proven everyone wrong. Mercedes wasn't a mistake. It was the best decision of his career. But as Lewis looked out at the sea of faces in the grandstand, his heart felt empty. Anthony wasn't there. For the first time in Lewis's racing career, his father had missed a championship-deciding race. Anthony was back in England, watching on television like millions of strangers, instead of being there to share the greatest moment of his son's life. Lewis made their gesture anyway. 2 taps over his heart, point to the sky. But there was no one to make it back to him. The cameras caught it, but it felt hollow, like talking to someone who wasn't listening. That night, Lewis called his father from his hotel room in Abu Dhabi. "Dad, I won the championship." "I know, son. I watched on TV. Congratulations." Anthony's voice sounded tired and distant. There was no excitement, no joy, just polite words between 2 people who used to share everything. "Why weren't you here?" Lewis asked quietly. There was a long pause. Anthony sat in his small apartment in Stevenage, looking at a photo of Lewis's first karting trophy on his kitchen table. "You don't need me there anymore, Lewis. You have your team, your celebrity friends, your new life. I'm just the old man from Stevenage who used to drive you to go-kart tracks." "Dad, that's not true. You're my father. You're the reason I'm here." "Am I?" Anthony asked. "When was the last time you asked for my advice? When was the last time we talked about racing instead of your schedule being too busy?" Lewis couldn't answer. He realized it had been months since they had really talked. Maybe longer. "I'm proud of you, son," Anthony continued, "but I think it's time for me to step back. You've outgrown your old dad." The phone call ended with both men feeling more alone than they had ever felt in their lives. The next 3 years were the most successful and most miserable of Lewis's life. He won the championship again in 2015, then again in 2017, then 2020. Each victory was spectacular. Each celebration felt empty. Anthony watched every race on television. He still wore his red cap. He still made their gesture when Lewis did it on the starting grid. But they were like 2 actors playing their parts for an audience, instead of a father and son sharing a real moment. Lewis dated pop stars and movie actresses. He bought houses in 3 different countries. He started a fashion line and invested in restaurants. His life looked perfect from the outside. But late at night, in his fancy apartment in Monaco, Lewis felt more lost than when he was 8 years old and nervous about his first karting race. Anthony, meanwhile, was dealing with problems he never told his son about. In 2016, Anthony had a small stroke while watching Lewis race in Hungary. He was alone in his apartment when it happened. For 20 minutes, he couldn't move his left arm or speak clearly. By the time the ambulance arrived, the worst had passed, but the doctors warned him it could happen again. Anthony didn't tell Lewis. He didn't want his son to worry or feel guilty about their distance. So he recovered alone, learning to walk properly again, doing physical therapy by himself. The medical bills ate up most of Anthony's savings. He had to sell the family home in Stevenage and move to a smaller apartment. All those years of spending everything on Lewis's racing career had left him with almost nothing for his own future. But Anthony was too proud to ask for help. And Lewis was too busy with his celebrity life to notice his father's struggles. In 2018, Anthony was diagnosed with early-stage Parkinson's disease. His hands started to shake slightly. His balance wasn't as good as it used to be. Simple tasks like tying his shoes became difficult. Again, he kept it secret from Lewis. Anthony would sit in his small apartment, watching his son celebrate victories on television, and wonder how they had drifted so far apart. The boy who used to call him after every practice session now went weeks without contacting him. Lewis, for his part, threw himself into activism and business ventures. He spoke about mental health and social justice. He used his platform to help other people. But he couldn't fix the broken relationship with the person who mattered most to him. In 2019, after winning his 6th World Championship, Lewis gave an interview to a British magazine. "What's the most important thing in your life?" the reporter asked. Lewis thought for a long moment. "Success," he said finally. "Proving that I belong here. Showing young kids who look like me that they can achieve anything." The reporter pressed him. "What about family? Your father was instrumental in your early career." Lewis's face tightened. "My father and I, we have different perspectives now. I've grown beyond needing someone to hold my hand. This sport is about being independent, being strong on your own." When Anthony read those words in the magazine, it felt like a knife through his heart. Lewis had reduced their entire relationship to holding his hand. All those years of sacrifice, all that love, dismissed as if it meant nothing. That was the moment Anthony decided to step back completely from Lewis's world. 2020 was the worst year yet. The pandemic meant races without crowds. Lewis won his 7th World Championship, tying Michael Schumacher's record, but celebrated alone on the track in Turkey. As he made their gesture after crossing the finish line, Lewis realized he was pointing to empty grandstands. No fans, no family, no Anthony. The gesture that had once connected him to his father now just reminded him of how alone he had become. After the race, Lewis sat in his hotel room and tried to call Anthony. The phone rang and rang before going to voicemail. "Dad, it's me. I just won my 7th championship. I wanted to share it with you. I know things have been difficult between us, but you're still my father. You're still the reason I'm here. Please call me back." Anthony listened to the voicemail 3 times. He wanted to call back. He wanted to celebrate with his son. But he was tired of being treated like a stranger in Lewis's life. Tired of feeling like a burden from Lewis's past, instead of a person who mattered in his present. So he didn't call back. 2021 brought the most dramatic championship battle in years. Lewis fought Max Verstappen for the title all season long. It came down to the last lap of the last race in Abu Dhabi. Lewis was leading. The championship was in his hands. Then a safety car changed everything. Max passed him on the final lap and won the title. Lewis was devastated. His 8th championship, his chance to stand alone as the greatest driver in history, was gone. As he sat in his car after the race, Lewis looked up at the grandstand. For a moment, he forgot about their distance and looked for his father automatically. But Anthony wasn't there. He was at home in England, watching his son's heart break on television. That night, Lewis called again. "Dad, I lost the championship. I know, son. I'm sorry. I needed you there today. I needed to see you in the stands making our gesture. I needed to remember why I started racing in the first place." Anthony's voice was quiet. "You said you didn't need anyone to hold your hand anymore." Lewis felt tears starting to form. "I was wrong, Dad. I was so wrong. But it felt too late. 7 years of distance couldn't be fixed with one phone call. The gap between them had grown too wide." 2022 and 2023 were Lewis's worst seasons in years. Mercedes built poor cars. Lewis struggled to win races. The media questioned whether he was too old, whether his motivation was gone. For the first time since he was 8 years old, Lewis didn't love racing anymore. He had achieved everything he thought he wanted: wealth, fame, recognition. But he had lost the thing that made it all worthwhile. He had lost his connection to the man who had given everything to make his dreams possible. Late in 2023, Lewis made a decision. He was going to retire after the 2024 season. He would quit while he still had some dignity left. before the sport completely passed him by. But first, he was going to try one more time to bridge the gap with his father. He didn't know that Anthony was fighting his own battle. Against time, against illness, against the regret of letting pride keep him away from the son he loved more than life itself. Both men were broken. Both men were proud. Both men were too stubborn to make the first move toward healing. But sometimes love finds a way to break through even the strongest walls. And sometimes, it takes nearly losing everything to remember what really matters. The 2024 season was about to begin. Neither Lewis nor Anthony knew it would be the year that would test their love, challenge their pride, and ultimately remind them both why that simple gesture meant everything. The distance between their hearts was about to become a bridge back to each other. But it would take a miracle to make it happen. January 2024. The phone call that changed everything. Lewis Hamilton sat in his Monaco apartment, staring at his collection of racing trophies. 7 world championships. 103 race wins. More records than he could count. But the shelves felt empty somehow. His phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Mr. Hamilton, this is Dr. Sarah Chen from Stevenage General Hospital. Your father, Anthony Hamilton, is in our emergency department. He listed you as his emergency contact. Please call immediately." Lewis's hands shook as he dialed the hospital. His heart pounded so hard he could hear it in his ears. "Dr. Chen speaking. This is Lewis Hamilton. You texted me about my father? Mr. Hamilton, your father collapsed at home this morning. His neighbor found him and called an ambulance. He's stable now, but we need to talk to you about his condition." Lewis felt the world spinning around him. "What condition? Is he okay?" "Sir, I think it's best if you come here. Your father has been dealing with some serious health issues. Issues he apparently hasn't shared with his family." 3 hours later, Lewis walked through the doors of Stevenage General Hospital. He hadn't been back to his hometown in over 2 years. Everything looked smaller than he remembered. Dr. Chen met him in the hallway. She was a kind-looking woman with tired eyes. "Your father is in room 12, she said. "But before you see him, I need to explain what's been happening." They sat in a small family room that smelled like disinfectant and worry. "Mr. Hamilton, your father has Parkinson's disease. Early stage, but progressing. He also had a stroke in 2016 that he apparently recovered from on his own. His medical records show he's been managing these conditions without any family support." Lewis felt like he couldn't breathe. "Parkinson's? The stroke? How long have you known?" "The Parkinson's was diagnosed in 2018. The stroke we only discovered today when we did his brain scan. There's scar tissue that shows it happened years ago." 2018? Lewis whispered. "That's 6 years ago. Why didn't he tell me?" Dr. Chen looked at him with gentle eyes. "That's something you'll need to ask him. But Mr. Hamilton, I need you to understand. Your father is a proud man. He's been living alone, managing his medications alone, going to appointments alone. The neighbors say he hasn't had any visitors in months." Lewis felt tears starting to form. While he had been living his celebrity life, winning races and dating famous people, his father had been fighting this battle completely alone. "Can I see him now?" Anthony was lying in the hospital bed, looking smaller and older than Lewis had ever seen him. His red baseball cap sat on the bedside table next to a pair of glasses. Lewis didn't know his father needed. Anthony's eyes opened when Lewis walked in. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "Hello, son," Anthony said quietly. His voice was weaker than Lewis remembered. "Dad." Lewis sat down in the chair next to the bed. "Why didn't you tell me?" Anthony looked away. "Tell you what? The Parkinson's. The stroke. All of it." Anthony was quiet for a long time. His hands shook slightly as he adjusted his hospital blanket. "You were busy," he said finally. "You had your own life, your championships, your success. I didn't want to be a burden." "A burden?" Lewis felt anger rising in his chest. "Dad, you're my father. You're not a burden. You're the most important person in my life." "Am I?" Anthony asked. "When was the last time you called me just to talk? Not because you won a race or lost one. Just to see how I was doing?" Lewis tried to think. He couldn't remember. "That's what I thought," Anthony said sadly. Lewis felt his heart breaking. "Dad, I'm sorry. I got caught up in everything. The fame, the money, the pressure. I forgot what really mattered." "You didn't forget, son. You grew up. You moved on. That's what children are supposed to do." "No," Lewis said firmly. That's not what happened. I got selfish. I got proud. I thought I didn't need anyone anymore. But I was wrong. I need you, Dad. I've always needed you. Anthony looked at his son with surprise. This wasn't the distant celebrity Lewis he had seen in interviews. This was his boy, his racing partner, the kid who used to make their special gesture before every race. Lewis, I've been thinking about things, Anthony said slowly. About us, about how we drifted apart, and I realized I was stubborn too. I was hurt that you didn't need me anymore, so I pulled away instead of trying to stay close. You were hurt because I acted like you didn't matter, Lewis said. But you've always mattered, Dad. Every race I've ever won, every championship I've ever earned, it was all because of what you taught me. It was all because of the love you gave me. Anthony felt tears in his eyes. I missed you, son. I missed talking about racing with you. I missed being part of your world. Then come back, Lewis said immediately. Come back to my world. Come to the races. Be part of my team again. Lewis, I use a walking stick now. Sometimes my hands shake so much I can't hold a coffee cup steady. I'm not the man who used to work 3 jobs to pay for your karting. Lewis reached over and took his father's shaking hand in both of his own. Dad, you're exactly the man you've always been. Strong, proud, full of love for his son. The Parkinson's doesn't change that. Nothing changes that. They sat in silence for a moment, holding hands for the first time in years. I want to take care of you, Lewis said quietly. I want to make sure you have the best doctors, the best treatment, everything you need. Anthony started to protest. I don't want your charity, Lewis. It's not charity, Dad. It's family. It's what you did for me for 20 years. You gave me everything you had so I could chase my dreams. Now let me do the same for you. Anthony looked at his son. Really looked at him. This wasn't the celebrity he had seen in magazines. This was Lewis. His Lewis. The boy who used to make their special gesture before every race. Okay, Anthony said softly, but I have conditions. Anything. I don't want to be treated like a sick old man. I want to be treated like your father, your partner, the guy who knows more about racing than anyone else in your life. Lewis smiled for the first time in months. Deal. And I want to come to Monaco next month. For the Grand Prix. I've never missed Monaco. Dad, the doctors said you need to rest. The doctors don't understand. Anthony said with a spark of his old fire. Monaco isn't just a race for us. It's where everything started to make sense. It's where dreams come true. Lewis squeezed his father's hand tighter. Then we'll go to Monaco together. Anthony made their gesture with his free hand, tap tap over his heart, then pointing toward the hospital ceiling. Lewis made it back immediately. For the first time in 7 years, the gesture felt real again. It wasn't for the cameras or for show. It was just a father and son, remembering that love is stronger than pride, stronger than distance, stronger than time itself. But they didn't know that Monaco 2024 would test that love in ways they couldn't imagine. They didn't know that Anthony's condition was worse than the doctors were telling them. They didn't know that time was more precious than either of them realized. All they knew was that they had found each other again. And for now, that was enough. Over the next few weeks, Lewis moved his father into a beautiful apartment near his own place in Monaco. He hired the best doctors in Europe. He made sure Anthony had everything he needed: medical equipment, physical therapy, nursing care when necessary. But more importantly, they started talking again. Really talking. Lewis would visit every day after training. They would sit on Anthony's balcony overlooking the Mediterranean Sea and talk about racing, about life, about all the years they had wasted being stubborn. Anthony shared stories Lewis had never heard, about his own father in Grenada, about his dreams before Lewis was born, about how proud he had always been, even during their worst years apart. Lewis talked about his loneliness, his struggles with fame, his regret about letting success change him into someone he didn't recognize. I won 7 championships, Lewis said one evening as they watched the sunset over Monaco Harbor. But I wasn't happy with any of them. Not really. Because the person I most wanted to share them with wasn't there. I was always there, son, Anthony replied. Maybe not in the grandstands, but I was always watching, always proud, always making our gesture to the television screen, hoping you could somehow feel it. Lewis felt his heart break and heal at the same time. I felt it, Dad. Even when I was angry at you, even when I pretended I didn't need you. I felt it every time. As the 2024 Formula One season approached, Lewis made a decision. This wasn't going to be his retirement year after all. This was going to be his comeback year. His return to racing with joy instead of just ambition. Because now he remembered why he had started racing in the first place. Not for fame or money or records, but for the pure happiness of sharing something special with the person he loved most in the world. The miracle they had both needed wasn't magic. It was forgiveness. It was swallowing their pride. It was remembering that love is more important than being right. But the biggest test was still coming. Monaco 2024 was just weeks away, and neither Lewis nor Anthony knew it would be the most important race of their lives. Not because of the championship points or the victory celebration, but because it would be their chance to show the world what love really looks like. And because time was running out faster than either of them knew. March 2024. A new beginning. Lewis Hamilton walked into the Mercedes factory in Brackley, England, with a spring in his step that nobody had seen in years. His father Anthony sat in the passenger seat of Lewis's car outside, wearing his lucky red cap and looking stronger than he had in months. "Good morning, Lewis," said Toto Wolff, the Mercedes team principal. "You look different." Lewis smiled. "I feel different, Toto. I feel like I remember why I love this sport again." It was true. For the first time since 2021, Lewis was excited about racing. Not just competitive or determined, actually excited. Like a kid on Christmas morning. The reason was sitting outside in the car park, probably listening to old reggae music and tapping his fingers on his walking stick in rhythm. Anthony had been living near Lewis in Monaco for 2 months now. Every morning they had breakfast together on Anthony's balcony. Every evening they watched old race videos and talked about technique and strategy. It was like the old days in Stevenage, except now they were both older and wiser. And they both knew how precious their time together really was. "The car looks good this year," Lewis said, walking around the sleek silver Mercedes. "Really good." "It should be," Toto replied. "We've fixed most of the problems from the last 2 seasons. This car can win races, Lewis. Maybe even championships." Lewis nodded, but his mind wasn't on championships. It was on sharing victories with his father again. On making their gesture mean something real in the grandstands instead of just for the cameras. The 2024 season started in Bahrain. Anthony flew with Lewis on his private jet, something that would have been unthinkable just months earlier. Anthony brought his medications, his walking stick, and a photo of Lewis's grandfather Davidson that Lewis had never seen before. "Grandpa would be so proud to see you racing again," Anthony said as their plane took off. Not just driving fast, but racing with joy. Lewis qualified 3rd in Bahrain. Not pole position, but close enough to fight for the win. As he sat in his car on the starting grid, he looked up at the grandstand and found his father easily. Anthony was there in his red cap holding a small British flag, making their gesture. Lewis made it back, and for the first time in years it felt like magic. The race was incredible. Lewis started 3rd, but moved up to 2nd by the first corner. For 30 laps, he battled with Max Verstappen for the lead. The 2 cars were so close that sometimes they were side by side for entire corners. Lewis eventually finished 2nd, just behind Max. As he climbed out of his car, he was smiling like he had won the championship. "Great drive, Lewis," his engineer shouted over the noise of the celebration. But Lewis wasn't listening. He was looking for his father in the crowd. When he found Anthony, both men made their gesture at exactly the same time. The television cameras caught it, and something magical happened. Social media exploded with people talking about the father and son who had found each other again. Fans posted their own videos making the same gesture with their families. "What does that sign mean?" a reporter asked Lewis after the race. Lewis smiled. "It means my dad and I love each other to the moon and back. It means some things are more important than winning or losing." Anthony watched the interview from the paddock, tears in his eyes. His son had just told the whole world that their relationship mattered more than racing success. 3 weeks later, they were in Australia. Lewis won his first race in over 2 years, crossing the finish line with a huge smile on his face. As he celebrated on the podium, Lewis looked for his father in the crowd. Anthony was there, making their gesture with both hands raised high above his head. Lewis pointed to the sky with both hands too. and the crowd went crazy. They didn't know the full story, but they could feel the love between father and son. "This win is for my dad," Lewis said in his post-race interview. "For believing in me when I stopped believing in myself. For teaching me that winning means nothing if you don't have someone special to share it with." The racing media called it Lewis's comeback story. But Lewis knew it wasn't about coming back to racing. It was about coming back to his family. Race after race, Lewis and Anthony traveled together. Anthony's health had good days and bad days, but he never missed a race weekend. Sometimes he needed help walking from the car to the grandstand. Sometimes his hands shook so much he couldn't hold his coffee cup. But he was always there, wearing his red cap, making their gesture. By mid-season, Lewis had won 4 races and was leading the championship for the first time since 2021. The media couldn't stop talking about his transformation. "What's different about you this year?" a journalist asked. "I'm not racing alone anymore," Lewis replied simply. "My dad is back in my corner. We're a team again, like we were when I was 8 years old." Anthony, watching from the media center, felt his heart swell with pride. Not because his son was winning races, but because Lewis had become the man Anthony always knew he could be. But Anthony was keeping a secret from Lewis. The doctors in Monaco had told him something that Lewis didn't know. The Parkinson's was progressing faster than expected. Anthony might have months, not years, before he would need full-time care. Anthony decided not to tell Lewis yet. He wanted to enjoy these races, these moments of pure happiness, without the shadow of worry hanging over them. In July, they traveled to Silverstone for the British Grand Prix, Lewis's home race. The crowd was enormous, and everywhere Anthony looked, he saw British flags and Lewis Hamilton merchandise. "Look at that, son," Anthony said as they walked through the paddock. "All these people came to cheer for you." Lewis looked around at the fans and felt grateful. But then he looked at his father, walking slowly with his walking stick, wearing his faded red cap, and felt something even stronger than gratitude. "Dad, they're cheering for us," Lewis said. "For the dream we built together, for never giving up on each other." Lewis won at Silverstone, his 6th victory of the season. As he drove his victory lap, he stopped his car near the grandstand where his father was sitting. Anthony stood up, even though it was difficult with his condition, and made their gesture one more time. Lewis climbed out of his car and ran to the fence separating the track from the grandstand. He reached through the barrier and grabbed his father's hand. "We did it, Dad," Lewis shouted over the noise of the crowd. "Just like we dreamed." The cameras captured every second. Father and son holding hands through a fence, both crying with happiness. That night, Anthony called his doctor in Monaco. "Dr. Chen, it's Anthony Hamilton. I need to ask you something. Is there any chance I could get worse quickly? Like very quickly?" "Mr. Hamilton, why are you asking? Are you having new symptoms?" Anthony was quiet for a moment. "Monaco is next month. The Grand Prix. It's the most important race for Lewis and me. I need to be there. I need to be strong enough to be there." "Mr. Hamilton, I understand Monaco is important to you, but you need to be realistic about your condition." "Doctor, you don't understand. Monaco isn't just a race. It's where Lewis might win his 8th championship. It's where our story might reach its perfect ending. I have to be there, whatever it takes." Dr. Chen was concerned. "What aren't you telling your son, Mr. Hamilton?" Anthony looked out his window at the lights of Monaco Harbor. "I'm not telling him that I might not have much time left. I'm not telling him that every race we share together now might be our last. I just want to give him one perfect season before." "Before what?" "Before I can't be his racing partner anymore." Dr. Chen was quiet for a long moment. "Mr. Hamilton, you need to talk to Lewis about this. He deserves to know." "After Monaco," Anthony said. "Let me give him Monaco first. Let me give us both that perfect moment. Then I'll tell him everything." But Anthony didn't know that time was even shorter than he feared. He didn't know that Monaco 2024 would indeed be their perfect moment, but also their last dance together in the way they had always dreamed. The next morning, Anthony woke up feeling weaker than usual. His hands were shaking more than normal, but Monaco was only 3 weeks away. He had to hold on. He had to be strong enough for one more race, one more gesture, one more chance to show the world what love between a father and son really looked like. Because some moments are too important to miss. And some promises are too sacred to break, even when time is running out faster than anyone knows. May 2024, the week before Monaco. Anthony Hamilton sat in his doctor's office in Monaco, trying to hide how much his hands were shaking. Dr. Chen looked at his test results with concern written all over her face. "Mr. Hamilton, your condition has progressed significantly in the past month. These tremors, the balance issues, the fatigue, they're all getting worse much faster than we expected." Anthony gripped his walking stick tighter. "But I can still travel, right? I can still go to the race this weekend?" "That's what I'm worried about," Dr. Chen said gently. Monaco is a very demanding event. The crowds, the noise, the long day in the grandstand. Your body is under a lot of stress right now. Doctor, you don't understand. This isn't just any race. This is Monaco. This is where Lewis might clinch his 8th championship. This is the most important day of our lives. Dr. Chen studied the proud man sitting across from her. She had been treating Anthony for months now, and she understood how much this meant to him. "What does your son know about your recent decline?" Anthony looked away. "Nothing. And I want to keep it that way. At least until after the race." "Mr. Hamilton, that's not fair to him. If something happens during the race weekend, nothing will happen," Anthony said firmly. "I've made it this far. I can make it one more week. One more race. Then I'll tell him everything." But Anthony was hiding more than Dr. Chen knew. That morning, he had fallen in his apartment bathroom and couldn't get up for 20 minutes. His left leg had stopped working properly. By the time he managed to stand, he was exhausted and scared. He hadn't told anyone. Not his nurse, not his doctor, and definitely not Lewis. Because Monaco was in 5 days and Anthony Hamilton was not going to miss it. That evening, Lewis came to visit his father like he did every day. Anthony was sitting on his balcony watching the sunset over Monaco Harbor when Lewis arrived with takeout dinner from their favorite restaurant. "How are you feeling, Dad?" Lewis asked, setting the food on the small table. "Great," Anthony lied. "Ready for the biggest race of the year." Lewis studied his father's face. Anthony looked tired, more tired than usual. His hands were shaking as he tried to open his dinner container. "Dad, are you sure you're okay? I look like an old man who's excited to see his son win Monaco." Anthony interrupted with a smile. "That's all." Lewis wanted to push the subject, but he could see his father didn't want to talk about it. So instead, they talked about racing strategy and tire choices, and all the technical details that had always been their special language. As they ate, Anthony watched his son's face light up when they discussed the race. Lewis was so happy, so excited, so full of hope for the weekend ahead. Anthony made a silent promise to himself he would not ruin this moment for Lewis. Whatever was happening to his body, whatever the doctors were worried about, he would be strong for one more week. "Lewis," Anthony said quietly, "I need to tell you something." Lewis looked up, concerned by his father's serious tone. "Tomorrow might be special, son. I can feel it. Something tells me this Monaco race is going to be different from all the others." "Different how?" Anthony made their gesture. Tap, tap over his heart, then pointing to the sky, but his hands shook more than usual. And Lewis noticed. "I don't know exactly," Anthony said. "I just know that sometimes life gives you perfect moments. Moments when everything comes together exactly the way it's supposed to. And I think tomorrow might be one of those moments for us." Lewis felt a strange chill run down his spine. There was something in his father's voice, something that sounded almost like goodbye. "Dad, you're talking like this is our last race together." Anthony forced a smile. "Don't be silly, son. I'm just saying that tomorrow is going to be special. You'll know when you know." Race day morning, Monaco Grand Prix. Anthony woke up at 5 in the morning, 2 hours before his alarm. His whole body ached and his left leg felt weak and unsteady. But today was Monaco, and he was going to be there if it killed him. He managed to shower and dress himself, though it took twice as long as usual. He put on his lucky red baseball cap and picked up his small British flag, the same one he had carried to Lewis's races for 20 years. Lewis arrived at 8 to pick him up. Anthony was waiting by his front door, dressed and ready, trying to look stronger than he felt. "Morning, Dad. Ready for the big day?" "I've been ready for this day my whole life," Anthony replied. The drive to the Monaco circuit was quiet. Lewis was focused on the race ahead, mentally preparing for what could be the most important qualifying session of his career. Anthony sat in the passenger seat, taking in every detail of the familiar streets. This was where he had first brought Lewis as a teenager to watch Formula One cars up close. This was where they had dreamed together about Lewis racing here someday. And now, 20 years later, Lewis was the favorite to win. At the circuit, Lewis helped his father get settled in the Mercedes hospitality area. Anthony's special wheelchair was there waiting, something Lewis had arranged without telling his father, just in case. "Dad, if you get tired at any point, please use the wheelchair," Lewis said. "There's no shame in it. I'll be fine, son. I want to watch qualifying from the grandstand, not from some corporate box. I want to be with the real fans, the people who understand what this means." Lewis wanted to argue, but he could see the determination in his father's eyes. This was important to Anthony, and Lewis wasn't going to take that away from him. Qualifying was perfect. Lewis put his Mercedes on pole position for the Monaco Grand Prix, his first pole at Monaco in 5 years. As he climbed out of his car, he looked up at the grandstand where his father was sitting. Anthony was on his feet, leaning heavily on his walking stick, making their gesture with his free hand. Lewis made it back, and for a moment, everything else disappeared. The cameras, the crowds, the pressure, none of it mattered. There was just a father and son sharing a perfect moment. That evening, Lewis sat with his father in the hospital. Anthony had collapsed in the grandstand during qualifying, though he had managed to stay conscious long enough to see Lewis take pole position. "Dad, maybe you should skip the race tomorrow. Your health is more important than—" "No," Anthony said firmly from his hospital bed. "I am going to that race tomorrow, even if they have to wheel me there in this bed. Do you understand me?" Lewis saw the fire in his father's eyes and knew there was no point in arguing. "Okay, Dad. But you're using the wheelchair, and there will be medical staff with you at all times." "Deal," Anthony said. "But Lewis, I need you to promise me something. Anything. Tomorrow, when you're out there on the track, I want you to race like the boy I taught, not the man everyone expects you to be. Remember why we started this journey. Remember what racing felt like when you were 8 years old and just wanted to make your dad proud." Lewis felt tears forming in his eyes. "Dad, you've always made me proud. Every single day of my life." Anthony reached for his son's hand. "And you've made me proud too, son. Prouder than any father has ever been. Win or lose tomorrow, you're already my champion." They made their gesture together, in the quiet hospital room, surrounded by beeping machines and the smell of disinfectant. But in that moment, they might as well have been back in Stevenage, dreaming about impossible things. Neither of them slept much that night. Anthony was fighting his body's increasing weakness, determined to be strong for one more day. Lewis was fighting his worry about his father, trying to focus on the race that could define his career. Race day morning, Anthony insisted on getting dressed in his racing clothes. The polo shirt Lewis had given him with Hamilton Racing Family embroidered on it, his lucky red cap, and his comfortable shoes that would help him navigate the circuit. The medical team helped him into his wheelchair, though Anthony insisted on walking the first part of the journey to show he was still strong. As they made their way to the grandstand, fans recognized Anthony and began cheering. People held up signs that said Anthony Hamilton, Father of Champions and the original Hamilton hero. Anthony waved weakly but smiled broadly. These people understood. They knew that behind every great driver was a family that had sacrificed everything to make the dream possible. At the grandstand, Anthony transferred from his wheelchair to his reserved seat. He had his small British flag, his program, and a photo of Lewis's grandfather Davidson that he had brought for luck. The other fans around him were respectful and kind. They could see he was unwell, but they also understood how important this was to him. "Mr. Hamilton," said an elderly woman sitting next to him, "my grandson and I make that gesture you and Lewis do. It's taught us to tell each other we love each other every day." Anthony smiled. "That's what it's for. Love should never be a secret." As the cars lined up on the starting grid, Anthony felt his strength fading, but he also felt something else: complete peace. Whatever happened in the next 2 hours, he had made it. He was here. He was going to watch his son race at Monaco one more time. The formation lap began. Anthony watched Lewis's silver Mercedes pull away from the starting grid and begin the slow lap around the circuit. This was the moment from the first chapter. The moment that would soon melt the hearts of millions. As Lewis drove past the grandstand during the formation lap, He spotted his father in the crowd exactly where Anthony always sat. Anthony looked frailer than ever, but he was there, in his red cap, holding his little British flag. Their eyes met across the distance. Lewis felt his chest tighten with emotion. His father had made it. Despite everything, the Parkinson's, the exhaustion, the fear, Anthony Hamilton was in the grandstand at Monaco, ready to watch his son chase history. Slowly, deliberately, Lewis lifted his hand from the steering wheel and made their gesture. 2 taps over his heart. Point to the sky. Anthony saw it immediately. Fighting against his trembling hands, he made the gesture back. The television cameras caught every second. Millions of people around the world watched a father and son share a moment of pure love, though they didn't yet know the full story behind it. Formation lap. Lewis. His engineer's voice crackled through the radio. Time to go. Lewis nodded inside his helmet, but kept his eyes on his father for one more precious second. "Dad's here," he whispered into his radio, his voice thick with emotion. This one's for him. What happened next would become the most shared, most watched, most beloved moment in motorsport history. But first, Lewis Hamilton had a race to win. Monaco Grand Prix 2024. The race that changed everything. The 5 red lights appeared above the starting line at Monaco. 20 Formula One cars sat ready to sprint toward the first corner at nearly 200 miles per hour. But in car number 44, Lewis Hamilton wasn't thinking about racing lines or tire strategy. He was thinking about his father sitting in the grandstand, fighting just to stay upright long enough to watch this race. The lights went out. Lewis got a perfect start, keeping his lead into the first corner. Behind him, Max Verstappen and Charles Leclerc battled for second place. But Lewis was already pulling away. From his seat in the grandstand, Anthony watched his son's silver Mercedes disappear into the first corner in the lead. Even through his exhaustion and pain, Anthony felt his heart soar with pride. "Come on, Lewis," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the roar of the engines. The race settled into a rhythm that was pure poetry. Lewis drove with a smoothness and confidence that reminded everyone why he was a 7-time world champion. Every corner was perfect. Every braking zone was calculated to the inch. Lap after lap, Lewis extended his lead. By lap 20, he was 8 seconds ahead of Max Verstappen. By lap 40, the gap was 15 seconds. "Lewis, you're driving beautifully out there," his race engineer said over the radio. "Just keep this pace, and the race is yours." But Lewis wasn't racing for the victory. He was racing for the man in the red cap who had given everything to get him here. Every time Lewis passed the main grandstand, he glanced up at Section G, row 15, say 8, Anthony's seat. And every time Anthony was there, somehow finding the strength to wave his little British flag. With 30 laps to go, Lewis was in complete control. The Monaco Grand Prix was his for the taking. But as he drove past the grandstand again, something looked different. Anthony was slumped in his seat. The British flag had fallen from his hands. Medical personnel were moving toward him through the crowd. Lewis's heart stopped. "What's happening in the grandstand?" he asked over the radio. "Section G. Is my father okay?" His engineer checked with race control. "Lewis, your father is receiving medical attention, but he's conscious. He's asking us to tell you to keep racing." Tears formed in Lewis's eyes inside his helmet. His father was collapsing in the grandstand, but still thinking about the race. Still thinking about Lewis's dreams. For a moment, Lewis considered pulling into the pits and ending the race. His father's health was more important than any victory. But then he heard his father's voice in his memory. "Race like the boy I taught, not the man everyone expects you to be." Lewis pressed harder on the accelerator. With 20 laps to go, word spread through the paddock about Anthony's condition. Television cameras focused on the medical team helping him in the grandstand. Fans around the world held their breath, understanding that something deeply personal was happening. Anthony refused to be taken to the medical center. "I'm staying here," he told the paramedics. "My son is winning Monaco. I'm not missing this." They compromised by bringing a wheelchair to his seat and giving him oxygen. Anthony sat there, breathing through a mask, but his eyes never left the track. With 10 laps remaining, Lewis had a 20-second lead. The race was won, but everyone knew this was about much more than racing now. Lewis's voice crackled over the radio. "How's my dad?" He's watching every lap, Lewis. He's not going anywhere. On lap 68 of 78, something magical happened. As Lewis passed the grandstand, Anthony managed to remove his oxygen mask for just a moment and make their gesture. His hands shook terribly, but the message was clear: tap, tap over his heart, then pointing to the sky. Lewis saw it and nearly lost control of his car from the emotion. The final laps were a blur of tears and determination. Lewis crossed the finish line to win the Monaco Grand Prix by 32 seconds, one of the most dominant victories in the race's history. But instead of celebrating with his team, Lewis did something unprecedented. He climbed out of his car and looked directly at the grandstand where his father was sitting. Anthony was there, still in his wheelchair, still wearing his red cap, tears streaming down his face. Without hesitation, Lewis began pushing through the crowd of photographers and officials. "I need to get to my dad," he told security. "I need to get to my dad right now." The crowd realized what was happening. Fans, officials, even other drivers' families started helping Lewis reach the grandstand. They created a path through the chaos of post-race celebration. Television cameras followed Lewis as he climbed over barriers and up concrete steps, still wearing his racing suit, his helmet tucked under his arm. Millions of people around the world watched this F1 driver abandon his victory celebration to reach his father. When Lewis finally made it to Anthony's section, the crowd around them fell silent. Father and son looked at each other for a long moment, both crying openly. Lewis knelt down beside his father's wheelchair and wrapped his arms around him. "I did it, Dad," Lewis whispered. "We did it." "No," Anthony replied, his voice weak but clear. "You did it. You became everything I dreamed and more." They made their gesture together. Anthony's shaking hands, tapping his heart twice, then both men pointing to the Monaco sky together. The crowd around them was filming with their phones. The television broadcast was showing every second to a global audience. But Lewis and Anthony were in their own world, sharing the moment they had been building toward for 29 years. Then Anthony said something that the microphones barely caught, but Lewis heard every word. "I need to tell you something, son. The doctors, they say I might not have much time left. That's why I had to be here today. That's why this one was so important." Lewis felt his world stop spinning. "Dad, no. Listen to me," Anthony said, holding Lewis's face in his trembling hands. "Every single day of my life has been worth it to see you become who you are. I'm not sad, Lewis. I'm grateful. I got to see my boy become a champion 8 times. I got to see you change the world. Not every father gets that gift." The cameras kept rolling, but no one in the crowd was making noise anymore. 30,000 people in the grandstand sensed they were witnessing something sacred. "I love you, Dad," Lewis said, his voice breaking. "I love you too, son. To the moon and back. Always." Lewis stayed with his father through the entire podium ceremony. Anthony insisted on watching from his wheelchair in the grandstand, still wearing his red cap, oxygen mask hanging around his neck. When they played the British national anthem for Lewis's victory, father and son sang along together, their voices barely audible but their hearts full. As the ceremony ended, Anthony whispered to Lewis, "There's one more thing I need to tell you. Something I've been saving for the right moment." But before he could continue, the medical team stepped in. Anthony had pushed his body beyond its limits. His blood pressure was dangerously low, and he needed immediate attention. "Dad, what did you want to tell me?" Lewis asked as the paramedics prepared to take Anthony to the hospital. Anthony smiled weakly and made their gesture one more time. "That gesture? It's not just ours, son. It goes back further than you know. There's a story I need to tell you about your grandfather, about where our dreams really came from." Lewis held his father's hand as they loaded him into the ambulance. "Tell me at the hospital, Dad. Tell me everything." As the ambulance pulled away from Monaco, heading to the hospital, Lewis sat in the back holding his father's hand. Anthony was stable but exhausted from the effort of making it through the race. "The story can wait," Lewis said softly. "Right now, just rest." But Anthony shook his head slightly. "No, son. Now is the perfect time. Because now you'll understand why this moment, why today was so important." Outside the ambulance windows, the streets of Monaco flashed by. Inside, a father was about to share the final piece of a story that had started 3 generations ago in the Caribbean. The gesture that had stopped the world was about to reveal its deepest secret. But first, Anthony Hamilton needed to gather the strength to tell his son about the grandfather he had never met, and the dream that had traveled across oceans and through decades to reach this perfect moment at Monaco. The most beautiful part of their story was still to come. Monaco Hospital. 2 hours after the race, Anthony Hamilton lay in the hospital bed, connected to machines that beeped softly in the quiet room. The Monaco Grand Prix trophy sat on the bedside table. Lewis had brought it straight from the podium ceremony. Lewis sat in the chair next to his father, still wearing his racing suit. He hadn't left Anthony's side since the ambulance ride. "The doctors say you're stable," Lewis said quietly. "But Dad, you scared me today. When I saw you collapse in the grandstand, I wasn't going to miss your 8th Monaco win," Anthony replied with a weak smile. "Not for anything in the world." Lewis squeezed his father's hand gently. "You said you had something to tell me. About Grandpa Davidson. About where our gesture really came from." Anthony's eyes grew distant, as if he was looking back through decades of memory. "Son, everything I told you about that gesture was true, but it wasn't the whole truth." Lewis leaned closer. "What do you mean?" Anthony reached into the small bag beside his bed and pulled out a worn photograph. It was the same picture he had shown Lewis months earlier. A young black man in mechanic's overalls, standing next to an old race car. "Your grandfather Davidson Hamilton," Anthony said slowly. "I told you he was a mechanic in Grenada who dreamed of racing but never got the chance. That was true, but there's more to the story." Lewis studied the faded photograph. "Tell me everything, Dad." Anthony took a shaky breath. "In 1960, your grandfather was 25 years old. He worked at a small garage in St. George's fixing cars for the wealthy families who lived on the island. But every weekend he would take an old car he had rebuilt and race it on the roads outside of town." "He actually raced?" "Oh yes," Anthony smiled. "He was fast, Lewis. Really fast. People came from all over Grenada to watch Davidson Hamilton race. He won almost every time he got behind the wheel." Lewis felt a chill run through him. "So the racing talent, it really does run in our family." "That's not even the best part," Anthony continued. "In 1962, a British racing team came to the Caribbean looking for new talent. They had heard about this incredible driver in Grenada who could make an old car dance like magic." Lewis's eyes widened. "They wanted to sign Grandpa? They offered him a contract to race in Europe. Formula Junior first, then maybe Formula One if he was good enough. Your grandfather would have been one of the first black drivers in international motorsport. 20 years before anyone else. What happened? Why didn't he go?" Anthony's voice grew heavy with emotion. "Because of me. Your grandmother Carmen was pregnant with me. The racing team said he could come to Europe, but his family would have to stay in Grenada. They couldn't afford to bring us." Lewis felt his heart sink. "So he chose family over racing. He chose love over dreams," Anthony said. "And he never regretted it." "But Lewis, the night before the British team left Grenada, your grandfather taught me something." Anthony demonstrated with his trembling hands. Tap tap over his heart, then pointing upward. He said, "Anthony, this gesture means something special. 2 taps on your heart, one for the love you carry, one for the love you give away. Pointing to the sky means our dreams are bigger than what we can see. Someday, a Hamilton will make it to the top of motorsport. Maybe not me, maybe not you, but someday." Lewis felt tears forming in his eyes. He knew. Even then, he knew. "When I left Grenada in 1975 to find work in England, your grandfather made that gesture to me at the airport. He said, 'Take this with you, son. And if you ever have a boy who loves racing, teach it to him too. Tell him it connects him to all the Hamilton men who dreamed before him.'" Lewis looked at the photograph with new understanding. "So when you taught me the gesture when I was 8, I was passing down 3 generations of racing dreams," Anthony finished. "Your grandfather's sacrifice, my hope, and your talent, all connected by that simple sign." Anthony pulled out another item from his bag. A small, worn piece of paper. "Your grandfather wrote this the day the British racing team left Grenada. I've carried it with me ever since." Lewis read the faded handwriting aloud. "Dreams don't have expiration dates. What I cannot finish, my son will continue." What my son cannot finish, his son will complete. Love is the bridge between generations. Every time you made that gesture on a racing track, Anthony said, you were honoring a grandfather you never met. Every victory, every championship, it was all connected to that moment in 1962 when Davidson Hamilton chose love over racing. Lewis felt overwhelmed by the weight of this revelation. Dad, this means every race I've ever won was part of a dream that started 62 years ago in the Caribbean. Anthony finished. 3 generations of Hamilton men, all connected by love and racing in that simple gesture. Lewis stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the Monaco harbor where millionaires' yachts floated peacefully. Today at Monaco, when millions of people saw us make that gesture, they were witnessing the completion of your grandfather's dream, Anthony said. A Hamilton finally made it to the very top of motorsport. We kept the promise. Lewis turned back to his father, tears streaming down his face. But Grandpa never got to see it. Oh, but he did, Anthony said with certainty. Every time we point to the sky, we're pointing to where he is. Every time we make that gesture, he's right there with us. Lewis came back to his father's bedside and knelt down. Dad, thank you for carrying this story. Thank you for teaching me the gesture. Thank you for connecting me to a grandfather I never knew but who gave me everything. There's one more thing, Anthony said, his voice growing weaker. Your grandfather made me promise something before he died in 1994. He made me promise that if our family dream ever came true, if a Hamilton ever became a champion, we would share the story with the world. Why? Because there are other families out there with dreams that seem impossible. Other grandfathers working in garages, dreaming of something bigger for their grandchildren. Other fathers sacrificing everything for their children's hopes. Your grandfather wanted them to know that dreams can travel across generations, that love is stronger than time. Lewis felt the full weight of his responsibility now. He wasn't just Lewis Hamilton, 7-time world champion. He was the completion of a dream that started with a mechanic in Grenada, who chose love over personal glory. What should I do with this story, Dad? Anthony smiled. Tell everyone. Tell them about Davidson Hamilton, who could have been the first black driver in Formula One but chose to stay home and raise his family. Tell them about the gesture that connects 3 generations of dreamers. Tell them that sometimes, the greatest victory is not crossing the finish line first. It's making sure the people you love know they matter more than any trophy. Lewis made the gesture to his father, tap tap over his heart, then pointing to the hospital ceiling. Anthony made it back, his hands shaking but his message clear. For the first time, Lewis understood the true power of what they were doing. They weren't just expressing love between father and son. They were honoring a grandfather's sacrifice. They were completing a dream that had traveled across oceans and through decades. Dad, will you help me tell Grandpa's story? Son, I've been waiting my whole life for you to ask that question. Outside the hospital window, the sun was setting over Monaco. Somewhere in the harbor, boats were celebrating Lewis's victory with fireworks and champagne. But in room 2037, father and son were sharing something more precious than any celebration. They were sharing the truth about love, sacrifice, and dreams that refused to die. The gesture that had melted millions of hearts around the world was about to become something even more powerful, a symbol of hope for every family who dared to dream impossible dreams. But first, Anthony had one more secret to share. One final revelation that would make their story complete. Lewis, Anthony said quietly, there's something else your grandfather left for you. Something I've been saving for the day you became a complete champion. Not just of racing, but of understanding what really matters. Lewis looked at his father with curious eyes. What is it, Dad? Anthony smiled mysteriously. Tomorrow, when you're feeling better, I'll show you your grandfather's real gift. The one that explains why this journey was always bigger than just racing. The most beautiful part of their story was about to be revealed. 3 days after Monaco. Anthony's apartment. Lewis sat beside his father's bed, watching Anthony sleep peacefully. The past 3 days had been a blur of doctors, tests, and difficult conversations about treatment options. But Anthony looked more at peace than Lewis had seen him in months. The Monaco Grand Prix trophy sat on the windowsill, catching the morning sunlight that streamed into the small bedroom. Next to it was the photograph of Davidson Hamilton and the handwritten note about dreams having no expiration dates. Anthony's eyes opened slowly. "Good morning, son." "Morning, Dad. How are you feeling?" "Like a man who got to see his boy win Monaco." Anthony smiled. "Like a man who finally told the whole truth about our family." Louis had been thinking about their conversation in the hospital for 3 days straight. The idea that his grandfather had given up a Formula One career to raise his family changed everything Louis thought he knew about their story. "Dad, you said Grandpa left something for me. Something you've been saving." Anthony's eyes sparkled with the excitement of someone about to share a treasured secret. "Help me get to the closet, son." Louis supported his father as Anthony walked slowly to the small closet in his bedroom. Anthony pointed to a wooden box on the top shelf, old and worn, but carefully maintained. "That box has been with me since 1975 when I left Grenada. Your grandfather gave it to me the night before I sailed to England." Louis carefully lifted down the box. It was heavier than he expected, made of Caribbean mahogany with D. Hamilton carved into the lid. "Open it," Anthony said, his voice full of anticipation. Inside the box, wrapped in faded cloth, was a racing helmet. It was old-fashioned leather with a simple design, but clearly built for speed. Next to it were racing gloves, worn but well-preserved. But what took Louis's breath away was what lay beneath the helmet. A handwritten journal, filled with pages and pages of notes in his grandfather's careful handwriting. Racing techniques, car setup advice, driving tips, and personal observations about what it meant to be fast. "Grandpa wrote a racing manual?" Louis asked in amazement. "More than that," Anthony said. "He wrote everything he learned about racing, everything he wanted to pass down to his family." "Look at the first page." Louis opened to the front of the journal. In neat handwriting it read, "For my son Anthony, and for his son after him, and for all the Hamilton boys who will carry our dreams forward. This book contains everything I learned about going fast and staying safe. But more importantly, it contains what I learned about why racing matters. Racing is not about beating other people. Racing is about becoming the best version of yourself. It is about pushing past fear, past doubt, past the voice that says you don't belong. It is about proving that where you come from doesn't determine where you can go. If my grandson ever gets the chance I didn't take, I want him to know that every fast corner, every perfect lap, every victory celebration is connected to the dreams of the grandfather he never met. With love and hope, Davidson Hamilton." Louis felt tears forming in his eyes. "Dad, he wrote this for me, 49 years ago. And he wrote this for me." "Keep reading," Anthony said softly. Louis turned the pages, finding detailed notes about racing lines, brake points, and car control. But scattered throughout were personal messages. "Remember that being the fastest driver means nothing if you forget to be a good man. Every time you sit in a race car, you carry the hopes of everyone who looks like you and dreams like you. The most important victory is not the one that makes you famous. It is the one that makes your family proud." Louis looked up at his father. How did he know? How did he know I would need to read these exact words? "Because he understood something that took me years to learn," Anthony replied. "Dreams don't die when the dreamer does. They just wait for the right person to carry them forward." At the bottom of the box was one more item, a small envelope with "For Louis" written on it in his grandfather's handwriting. Louis's hands shook as he opened it. Inside was a single piece of paper with a short message. "Dear grandson, if you are reading this, it means our family dream came true. It means a Hamilton made it to the top of racing. I am proud of you, even though I never got to meet you. I want you to know that every sacrifice your father made, every dollar he spent, every mile he drove to get you to the racetrack, all of it was worth it. Not because you became famous, but because you became the completion of something bigger than any one person. You are not just Louis Hamilton, race car driver. You are Louis Hamilton, keeper of our family's racing spirit. You are the answer to prayers I said 50 years ago." The helmet and gloves in this box were made for me by a craftsman in Grenada. I wore them in every race I ever ran. They were meant to take me to Formula One, but instead they stayed home to wait for you. Wear them in your next race, if you want to. Let Davidson Hamilton finally make it to Formula One, even if it's through his grandson's hands. But remember, the most important thing you can do is not win more races. It is to find someone else who needs help reaching their dreams. Someone who looks like us, who comes from where we came from, who needs to know that impossible dreams can come true. Be the grandfather to some young dreamer that I got to be to you, even from a distance. With all my love across time, your grandfather Davidson. Lewis couldn't speak. He held the letter against his chest and felt connected to a man he had never met but who had shaped every day of his life. Dad, this is incredible, but I don't understand. How could Grandpa know I would need this? How could he know exactly what to say? Anthony sat down slowly in his reading chair. Son, your grandfather was a wise man. But more than that, he understood something about love that I'm still learning. What do you mean? Real love doesn't end when someone dies. Real love finds ways to keep giving, keep helping, keep guiding, even across decades. Your grandfather's love for our family was so strong that it kept working long after he was gone. Lewis looked at the racing helmet in his hands. It was simple but beautiful, with a small Grenadian flag painted on one side. The doctors say I might have months, not years, Anthony said quietly. But Lewis, I'm not worried anymore, because I finally understand what your grandfather understood. Lewis felt panic rising in his chest. Dad, don't talk like that. We're gonna find the best treatments. We're gonna fight this. We are going to fight it, Anthony agreed. But son, I need you to understand something. Even when I'm gone, my love for you won't stop. It will keep working, keep helping you, keep connecting you to everything good in our family's story. Lewis knelt beside his father's chair. I'm not ready for you to go anywhere, and I'm not ready to go, Anthony smiled. But when that time comes, and it might be sooner than we want, I need you to promise me something. Anything. Promise me you'll use your grandfather's gift. Not just the helmet and gloves, but his wisdom. Promise me you'll find young drivers who need help, who need someone to believe in them the way we believed in you. Lewis thought about all the young black drivers he had met over the years. Kids who faced the same obstacles he had faced, the same doubts, the same people who said they didn't belong. I promise, Dad. I'll be for them what you were for me. And promise me you'll teach your children our gesture someday. Tell them about Davidson Hamilton, who chose love over racing. Tell them about Anthony Hamilton, who chose his son's dreams over his own comfort. And tell them about Lewis Hamilton, who learned that winning means nothing if you don't lift others up with you. Lewis made their gesture, tap tap over his heart, then pointing toward the ceiling. Anthony made it back, his hands steady for once. One more thing, Anthony said. That racing helmet, your grandfather never got to wear it in Formula One, but you can. In your next race, wear it for him. Let him finally make it to the starting grid. Lewis picked up the old leather helmet and held it carefully. Dad, what if I'm not fast enough anymore? What if my best racing days are behind me? Anthony reached for his son's hand. Lewis, you just won Monaco at 39 years old. You're leading the championship. Your best days aren't behind you. They're right now. This moment, when you understand not just how to win races, but why winning matters. Why does it matter, Dad? Because every time you cross a finish line first, you're proving to some young kid somewhere that impossible dreams can come true. You're showing them that where you start doesn't determine where you finish. You're being the example that someone else needs to keep believing. Lewis felt the weight of his responsibility and his privilege. He wasn't just racing for trophies anymore. He was racing for every kid who looked like him and dared to dream big. The next weekend, Lewis Hamilton took his grandfather's helmet to the Canadian Grand Prix. Before qualifying, he held it up for the cameras and told the world about Davidson Hamilton, the man who could have been Formula One's first black driver, but chose love over glory. Lewis wore the helmet during the race and won, his 8th victory of the season. As he crossed the finish line, he pointed not just to the sky but to the small Grenadian flag painted on his grandfather's helmet. In the grandstand, Anthony watched his son honor their family's story. For the first time in months, Anthony felt complete peace. The dream that started in Grenada in 1962 was finally fully realized. Not because Lewis had won another race, but because Lewis understood that he was part of something bigger than himself, something that would continue long after he stopped racing. Something that would help other dreamers believe in tomorrow. As Lewis made their gesture from the winner's podium, millions of people around the world made it back. The simple sign that started as a connection between father and son had become a symbol of hope for families everywhere. And somewhere, in whatever place exists beyond this world, Davidson Hamilton smiled and pointed to the sky, knowing that his choice to love his family over his own dreams had created something more beautiful than any racing victory ever could. The story that began with a gesture at Monaco was now complete. Not because it had ended, but because it had become eternal. Love, it turned out, really was stronger than time. This beautiful tale reminds us that behind every champion is a family that believed, sacrificed, and never gave up. It shows us that love really is stronger than time, and that the greatest victories happen not when we win for ourselves, but when we win for the people who matter most. We'd love to hear from you. Where are you listening from today? Drop a comment below and let us know what country or city you're in. It's amazing to see how stories like this connect people from all corners of the world. If this story touched your heart the way it touched ours, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe our channel for more inspiring stories that celebrate the power of family love and never giving up on your dreams. Most importantly, share this video with your friends and family. Stories like Lewis and Anthony's remind us what really matters in life. By sharing it, you're helping spread kindness, hope, and awareness that dreams can come true when we support each other. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey. Until next time, remember to make your own special gestures with the people you love, because you never know how much those moments might mean to them. Like, subscribe, and share to keep spreading the love.